Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to CIBC Presents Entrepreneurship 101. Just a couple of comments, and I'm glad those of you who are here instead of studying for exams, I think you'll find this much more useful. Next week's lecture is the last before the Christmas break, and that'll be Teresa Snellgrove and Fred Sweeney. It's kind of the kickoff on our marketing section, and it's on selling yourself, managing your career. Okay, but tonight we have a real treat. This is part of our Lived It lectures from those who have been there and done that. And I'm going to ask Randall Howard to come up to introduce tonight's speaker, who is Ray Simonson. Randall is a friend of Mars. He's been here a number of times. He's Ray's partner at Verdexis, which is a Kitchener-Waterloo boutique investment fund. So Randall, could I invite you up here to do the honors?
Well, thank you so much, Tony, and good evening, everyone in the audience. Good to see an audience of people, even in these economic times, out there trying to build businesses. And you know what? It is the best time to build a business. And tonight it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Ray Simonson. Ray is someone I've known for 12, 13 years. I first met Ray when I was building kind of my first startup into a public company, a company called MKS. Ray had the very good sense to actually buy our product, and that's how I met him. You know, it's actually best to meet someone as a customer, and I found we had a lot in common. What I really like about Ray, and have worked with Ray through some challenges and some pretty successful stuff as well, is Ray follows many of the rules that I've learned over the years, one of which is you don't drink your own bathwater. Ray is going to have tonight the ability to tell you about the successes and the failures, the things that didn't work well. I think many people who are very successful, they get hung up on how great they are, but the truth is the path to success is many times a choppy road. So Ray is a consummate storyteller. Ray has been incredibly successful in his career. And the other thing I think is interesting about Ray had probably 6 or 7 careers before he even got in the business of starting technology startups. And he's going to tell you, I think, about a few of them, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But what I do want to say is you're going to have a fascinating ride tonight, and you will have to excuse Ray his sense of humor. One good thing about Ray is he actually makes my jokes look much better than otherwise. So, and that, by the way, that's a compliment. So anyway, Ray, it's going to be a distinct pleasure to see you speak and share some of your wealth of experiences this evening with people who I assume are interested in taking some great technology or intellectual property or knowledge out and building them into real businesses. And you know what? It's fun. Even in these economic times, most days it's fun. Ray?
Thank you, Randall. Thank you, Randall, and thank you, Peter and Tony and everybody from Mars. I'm thrilled and honored to be here. I hope I can live up to that introduction. My mother would be impressed. So I'm going to start off by saying this can be as interactive as you'd like. I'm going to talk, and I'm not that funny, in spite of what Randall said. And so you can make it far more interesting by asking questions as I go. So we're going to talk a little bit about my transition from intrapreneur to entrepreneur, and I won't go through a lot of the background. So my CV, I'm the oldest of 10 children. I actually come from a fairly entrepreneurial family. My father ran several businesses, unfortunately had a few bankruptcies in there. My mother ran a restaurant, and a bunch of my siblings also run businesses. I actually did have, we want to talk about failures. My first business that I entered into after leaving home was an attempt to sell cosmetics in what turned out to be a pyramid scheme. So I can give a facial. I understand a lot about hypoallergenic cosmetics, but in the end I failed at that, and I had a basement full of cosmetics. I attended UBC. I really wanted to be an astrophysicist, and I partied too much in 1966 and flunked out. I did actually become a lumberjack. My father ran a logging business, and I did work in the bush from the age of about 13 or 14. And yeah, I can probably run a chainsaw, but I'm a little rusty. Came to Toronto, became a Teamster. It's a great way to learn negotiating skills, for those of you who know what Teamsters are. And then I went to Waterloo because it turns out that technology, and I found a love of computing when I was in Toronto working as a Teamster, and Waterloo was the place I thought I should go, because it turns out that computers and technology are actually a lot physically safer than being a logger or a Teamster. I then went on to Mutual Group, a big Canadian financial services company, now Sun Financial. Had a great career there. We'll talk a little bit about some of that. I left there, did some consulting. I did that for a year. Then I decided to get into a technology business with a couple of friends, which is a great way to do it. We formed Bluegill, and that'll be the focus of tonight's discussion. After Bluegill, I ended up at a company called CheckFree, where I was running the Canadian division and was the chief technology officer of that group. I then went to Tech Capital and did some entrepreneur in residence. Then I also went to Verdexis with Randall, which seems to be missing from the slide, but that's okay. And now I'm the CEO of a company called COREWORX. So we talked about entrepreneurship, and if you get the slide pack, there's half a dozen slides defining it. But entrepreneurship is really being intrapreneurship. Pardon me, I have trouble reading. I'm mildly dyslexic, which causes me all kinds of fun. In any event, intrapreneurship is entrepreneurship inside an enterprise, typically, and I did that, I would argue, for probably at least 15 to 17 years. Some of the benefits I got was paid for top quality technical training. I got, as I advanced through the ranks and became an executive in charge of managing budgets and people, I learned things that would be hard to learn if I would just come out of school and started a business. I learned about budgets, I learned about performance plans, I learned about costing. I just got a ton of good management experience. I learned how to work on teams. I had, unfortunately, a lot of failed attempts to teach me to communicate. I learned some facilitation skills, which were really quite useful in later life, and learned about things like how to work with different personalities. The other thing you get from working in a company and in an entrepreneurial role is a chance to build contacts with people who can help you later when you get out and start your own business. And through my career, I made some very good contacts at a company called IBM and Xerox, and another organization called Explorer, which was more of a user group in which we actually was the genesis for Bluegill. There are some downsides to intrapreneurship, especially if you're diplomatically challenged like I am. I found out from my boss after he retired that at least 12 occasions people had suggested I should be working somewhere else because they did not like my ideas about how badly they were doing things. Anyway, I left Mutual and went consulting. I had a great partner in Remind Stevenson, the Ashburnham Group. We did some great consulting. We had companies like IBM, Xerox, Commercial Union, a big British insurance company. We traveled a lot. We worked all over, everywhere but Canada, you can tell from there. And I learned a lot about international business and about running a small consultancy. But at the end of the day, I found myself assessing my career in '96. I'd been talking to a friend named Hal. I'd been on the board of this organization. I'd seen lots of other successful entrepreneurs, and I was starting to think that maybe it was time to try business again. And I was looking at about 4 different ideas for moving my career forward. Because the problem with being a consultant, it's fun, it's hard, but when you're a small consultancy, you're selling your hours, and there are only so many of them, no matter how many ends of the candle you burn. And so I was looking, I had been pretty fiscally irresponsible in my early life. I had no pension plan, I got divorced, I had no money. And I was sitting there in '96 saying, okay, so here I am, what am I gonna do? And I was probably by that time 48. And I looked at a bunch of things, and my friend Hal Davis had been talking to me about bluegill. I probably had more experience with the previous one, which was the big printer mashup startup. We had this clever idea of taking an IBM controller and putting it in a Xerox printer and making a hybrid machine that would be better than either of them. And I understood that real well because I wasn't an expert in that stuff in those days. But and we actually had some money. It turned out, looking back on it, wouldn't have been nearly enough. But bluegill intrigued me more. And so we'll talk about bluegill. I can remember having a discussion with my wife, and we're sitting there going, we're looking at these ideas. Taking a job with IBM would have been very satisfying. I'm sure I would have learned a lot. I could have gone to market and tried to become the CIO of some big company because I had some reasonable background for that. I could have done the printer mashup, or I could do bluegill. And I can remember talking to Monica as we were sitting in Hawaii and telling her the choices and asking her for advice. And she said to me quite wisely, she said, well, the bluegill thing makes the hair on the back of her neck stand up. And she also said, if you don't do that, you'll regret it forever, even though it's the riskiest one. So bluegill was, I was gonna have to put money in, not take money out. So we started to do that. We founded it in '96, Hal Davis, myself, Vinay Gupta, a fellow named Tom Kinnear, who's a professor at University of Michigan, and 4 investors put together $400,000. Now, that was 400,000 US at that time, probably 600 Canadian. My share of it was 50,000, and I had to borrow money from my wife, from both my kids, from my siblings and my in-laws to come up with the money, but we put it together. The company was headquartered in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a lovely town, in Hal's garage, which, before you feel too badly for us, Hal had a huge garage. In fact, his band used to practice in the garage. And we did development in Waterloo in my basement initially. Our goal was to converge at the time. Now, I'm going to take you way back to '96. A lot of you probably were in elementary school then, if you were born. But we saw the internet as a neat idea that was coming, and we thought it was coming way faster than it was later. But we also knew a lot about documents, and we said we should be able to take the internet and use it to deliver what gets delivered at that time in the mail, essentially bills and statements from big companies. And we thought we could do that. We were ambitious enough and audacious enough to figure that, this was something new. Nobody else had thought of it. We thought we could make it happen. As a technical guy, at the time I would be the CTO. I figured it would be, interesting and challenging. I knew and I trusted my partners that we could build the market and raise the money. So we got started. I'm not going to read all this to you, but in a simple language, what we wanted to do was turn client snail mail into an internet application to improve companies' receivables, get more money in faster, improve cross-selling by putting marketing. There's a book called One-to-One Marketing by Martha Rogers that was the thing that inspired us to try this part of it, and improve customer service. And that was the idea. It should have been easy. These are some examples of what you would see, what we built. We didn't build all of these, by the way. It sounded good, and so we moved on. I'm going to give you a brief background. Hal Davis was the CEO. He has a background in marine biology, and he did do some work on nuclear weapons triggers at some point that he's not allowed to talk about or he'll disappear. And he also ran a pretty successful rock band called Bigfoot. There was me, and there was Vinay Gupta, who's a friend of Hal's, fellow MBA graduate at Michigan. Vinay's background was in M&A and in regional sales for a company called Cabletron, which would have been a competitor of Cisco. We started hiring people. We didn't, $400,000 sounds like a lot of money, but you look at it and say, we got to make this last for a year. So we started small. Hal and I and Shannon, who was kind of the lady who did everything in the office from answer the phone to set up the local network, were our first 3 hires. And we hired a sales guy. We hired essentially our first real developer. And over time, we added some more people to that. And in '97, we had a small team, about a dozen people. And we turned down our first term sheet in mid-97, which I should say was a mistake. At the time, we were kind of arrogant, and we had a term sheet in front of us, and we said we're worth way more than that. So somewhere in mid-97, we told these guys to go away. And we said, we're worth more than that. It took another year to get some money. But back to the business strategy. We wanted to sell, our strategy was we're going to sell internal document groups, the people responsible for print and mail. So if you were to take Bell or Rogers, they probably spend on the order of $30 to $50 million a month to get their bills delivered and paid. We felt we could take 10% of that cost out of them. So we could take a $5 million, let's say $5 million cost, and we could do it for about, let's see, the difference in doing that is say $1 to $1.50. We thought we could do it for 5 cents. So huge saving. People should have been flocking to our doors to buy this stuff. Right? And somehow they didn't. But we'll talk about that a little more. We also decided that we would establish ourselves as the market leader, even though we were a little wee company. And I have to say, Hal is I think, a marketing genius. He was the guy that set this up. We tried to be the visionaries about this whole idea. We talked to analysts to try and develop the market. You start with small analysts, people who focus on particular things like the internet or on billing, and you get them involved. And over time, you work your way up to getting Gartner involved. And we had, by the time we had Gartner, we managed to become the top right quadrant, leading, I can't remember all the terms for that, but we became the market leader. The other thing we did was use our business contacts. Now, Hal had some contacts at a company called Ameritech, which was a big Midwest telco, which had about 30 or 40 million customers. And we managed to get them interested and get them to agree to buy our product, which at that point actually didn't exist. We installed a version of our product at Ameritech, I think in very early '97, which was basically cobbled together by our development team and I. And that way we could announce that that Ameritech had bought our product. They actually had only bought a demo, but we announced it. It got us, Ameritech bought from these guys, so we could go knock on someone else's door. First customer is important. Interesting fact is Ameritech never did buy our product. For 2 years, they almost bought it. The other thing we did was recognize the value of a partnership with a big player like IBM. Now, if you're a small technology company like Bluegill was, it's very difficult to get big companies to buy from you. And for very good reason. You're small, you're probably poorly funded, you may be clever, but are you going to be around in 5 years? And so by pursuing IBM very vigorously, and I had 2 relationships with IBM from my job at Mutual Life. Hal had been a competitor, but had some friendships with IBM in another division. Jim Diggs, one of our later executives, had actually worked for IBM. So we went after them pretty heavily and managed to get a partnership with them. We also decided that what we would do is create a version of our product, which nowadays you would call software as a service. In those days it was called service bureaus, or becoming known as ASPs, because we wanted to make it easier for people to get at the product. And we also felt that if we could go to a provider like this, get our product in, and they could go out and let other people see it, we could get our product in front of a lot of people who would eventually become customers of ours as well. And that was the idea behind the Service Bureau. Just a little on market positioning. Bluegill, when we started, we were in what would be called the #1 quadrant, which is missionary sales and new technology. So new market, new technology. Yes, this says it all. It's a tough way to do it, but it's also one of the most profitable if you can pull it off. So again, how do you build a market? Well, when you don't have a lot of money, you have to be very creative. And so what you do is you find people offering seminars and conferences in areas that are close to what you're doing, or if you're lucky, in areas that are doing what you're doing. And you position yourself as an expert, and you offer to speak. And you offer to speak in exchange for the right to have a booth at the show, for instance, or something like that. And Hal was masterful at doing that. You get other perks if you speak. The other thing we did is we would run workshops before a conference. So we would invite 15 or 20 people who were influential. We'd bring some people from IBM, we'd bring some analysts, we'd bring in some potential customers and a couple of customers, put them in a room and just talk to them about the industry and the market and what we were doing. And we did it in a very non-salesy way. We were trying to position ourselves as people who were visionary, who knew what was going on, and who you should talk to if you were thinking about this stuff. The advantage of that is a small group of 50 people attend the conference, our workshop, and then they go to the conference, and we arranged for them to have special badges that said, Bluegill attendee. And as they walked through the rest of the conference, everybody was asking them, what the hell is Bluegill? And they'd say, oh, you didn't go? I mean, it was the coolest thing. And they would start talking about it. So again, this is all clever marketing, and I take no credit for doing this. This was all Hal. You also work with partners. We did form a partnership with IBM. As I said, we were very small. At one point, as the chief technology officer, one of the most interesting things I had to do was to go to White Plains, New York to talk to a bunch of IBM architects and designers to convince them that they couldn't catch us. Because IBM had decided that this online commerce was going to be very key to IBM's future. And we were positioning ourselves to IBM as the thin edge of the wedge. We were the application that everybody wanted to buy to get into e-commerce. IBM guys told us, yeah, you're right, but by the way, our guys are going to build it themselves. So off we went, and I flew in, and I spent a couple of days talking to a bunch of guys. And we did convince them that, I didn't try to convince them they couldn't build it, because obviously they can. What I convinced them is that we were a year ahead of them, and that even though we had a small team, we were a year ahead of them, and by the time they put a team together, we'd be another year ahead of them. And so in the end, they decided that argument made some sense, and they decided not to buy a product. They signed with us. I can remember sometime, I think it was in late 97 or 98, a guy named Lou Gerstner, who was the guy who I think saved IBM, got on a big stage in front of an e-commerce group and announced that IBM was really serious about e-commerce. And in fact, they had signed a partnership with the leading vendor for electronic billing, Bluegill Technologies. He didn't know there was about 20 people in Bluegill, and he was just announcing us to the world. So it was, again, good marketing. The other thing you need to do is get a reference customer, make them real happy, and get them to sell for you. Get them to help you, get them to take calls. When you sign a deal with your first customer, you're going to give them the farm in a lot of ways, but you got to ask for a give back. You got to ask them to speak at conferences. You got to ask them to take calls. You got to ask them to host visits from potential suppliers. Again, more on finding customers. Hal had some relationships with Ameritech. That was our first customer. Trade shows, show up and work there, work hard. Our very first paying customer was Moore Business Communication Services, who a fellow walked in our booth, took a look at it, and within a week had bought the product. Use business contacts. I mentioned Hal and I belong to this organization called Explore. Through that organization, we had friends at most of the large US banks, telcos, and insurance companies. So we could call on them and they would listen to us, unlike if we'd just been some guys cold calling them. And of course, in the US, there's what I call the MBA mafia, which is this connection of MBA guys that know each other, and even if they don't know each other, they can find each other. And it certainly, I was impressed by how our team, we had 2 Michigan MBAs, 1 Harvard MBA, and 1 Purdue MBA. And they could kind of go to any town and find somebody that was working somewhere that we wanted to talk to, whether we're trying to sell to them or partner with them. So that was fantastic. Then there's development of channels. Again, IBM was both a technology partner and a channel partner, but we started with a company called Lasercom in Europe. Lasercom was a small technology service provider that was selling to telcos mostly and banks in Europe. And we managed to partner with them. They took training on our product. They became our European office until we got enough customers in Europe that we put our own office in. As I said, we had IBM. Without IBM, we would never have sold our software to AT&T or to Guardian Insurance, or I could put a dozen names up there. Of course, the downside is partners are great, but partners are expensive. They cost you time. And quite frankly, especially I would say the bigger they are, the more work you have to do to make them successful. So when you partner with IBM, expect you better make the first half dozen deals for them yourself and essentially give them to them to get them going. But once they get going, it's great. But it is work, and you do have to constantly focus on making them happy and making them successful. I talked about our sales and marketing strategy, and I told you how this brilliant plan of ours to save all this money should have driven the business, through the roof, and it didn't work. We walked in and we talked to we knew these guys who were friends. Look, you can save yourself $10 million a month if you buy our software. And our software at the time, I think we're selling it for $250,000. So it was a hell of a deal. But we should have known big companies don't actually do that sort of stuff very easily, and the guys we were talking to were not highly enough placed to make investments of the kind. And of course, we were doing this prior to Y2K, which meant some big technology guys did not want to talk to guys like us. But what we noticed was a change in the market. The internet was starting to happen, and all of a sudden, there were new groups within these companies called the web group and the internet marketing group. And they had money, and they didn't give a shit. They went and spent it. So we found we could sell to one. When we found one, we would go to the next guy and say, by the way, your competitors, internet guys, are putting our product up, and they're going to do marketing. And next thing you know, we could sell another one. So what I'm trying to say here is you got to be prepared to change your strategy if it's not working. And that may annoy your investors because they're saying, you told us this. And what you have to say is, yeah, that's what I thought then. But we've found out that ain't quite working, and we've got a better idea, and this is the new idea, and you have to make that change. And so we went from selling to the document and printer guys to selling to the marketing and the web group. The other thing is you have to kind of, as you're a little company, you have to be agile, you have to move fast. And you have to kind of keep up with your sales and marketing guys. And I have a story. Citibank was a big, well, you've probably heard of Citibank. They were more profitable back then. And they were interested in our product. Now, one of our competitors was this evil group called eDocs, who we absolutely hated, and I'm sure they hated us. And we had just this wonderful sort of war going on between us, which actually in the end, I think invigorated both of us and made us fight even harder. Our sales and business development guy had been in at Citibank, and he was pitching them. Now, I'm a technology guy, so our software was the best shit you ever saw. Our marketing was very good also. Our competitors had good marketing also, but their software looked better than ours because they had built some Windows GUIs, and it looked pretty neat. And so our sales guys always bitched and moaned at me about, you've got to get us a GUI for the product. And I kept saying, we're not ready. We're still building the foundation. There's no point putting the paint on until you finished putting the foundation in. And we were. And I used to get beat up at every management meeting because we didn't have a GUI. And I kept saying, we're not losing sales. Because at the end of the day, the customers didn't actually use the GUI. Our own guys did the install. And so we kept delaying it. One day I get a call from Jim, and Jim Diggs says, Ray, I did a bad thing. And I'm going, wow, what's he going to tell me now? He said, we're at Citibank, and we're doing great. He said, but I just got a call from our sponsor, the marketing guy, and he said, our technology guys really like your stuff, and they think your stuff's cool. But he said, our marketing guys really like eDocs' cool-looking GUI, and he said, you're losing the beauty contest. I said, well, Jesus, Jim, maybe I should come back down and explain to them why they don't need a GUI. He said, no, he said, I actually told them we have one. I'm saying, pardon? He said, I had to. He said, otherwise we're going to lose the sale. I told him we had one. But I told them we hadn't told them about it because we have a policy of never talking about anything in development, which of course was an outright lie. And he said, we told him it's in beta, and I said, oh shit. You know, I got a small development team of about 8 or 9 people, and now I got to build a GUI. I said, how much time do I have? He said, 2 weeks. So I said, okay, Citibank's important. So I called all the developers in a room and said, guys, everything stops. We got to have a GUI in 2 weeks. I've got this idea. I've seen this IBM product. I think we could pick it up and put our logo on it and try and make it look like a GUI. We don't actually have to have anything that really works. We just have to demonstrate something that looks like it's going to be a GUI. And of course, luckily for us, and again, being an entrepreneur, luck is useful if you can. It's good to have luck. One quiet little guy at the back named Wayne put his hand up and said, I've been working on a GUI. I said, why? He said, well, I'm just so offended by doing this by hand, the way your guys do, that at home in my spare time, which he couldn't have had much of because we made him work a lot, but he said, I've been developing one, and I've got it partly done. So I said, okay, Wayne, from now on, everybody works for Wayne. We have to get the GUI out temporarily, but temporarily everybody works for Wayne because we got to get that GUI out in 2 weeks, and we did. We had a beta out, we got it out, eventually it became a key part of our product. But the point of the story is sometimes you have to listen to sales and marketing. If you're a technology guy, you might think you're right. Probably a lot of us always think we're right. But every once in a while you got to listen to sales and marketing guys because they're the guys that are selling stuff. So the other thing is keep your customers happy. There were several times in which we would have some situation where something went out of control, sometimes our fault, sometimes not. Sometimes you just have to shut everything down and get down there and fix it, and make them happy. Because when you think about it, somebody's paid you money and in some cases put their careers on the line because they believed you or they believed your sales guys. And you can't let those guys fail, at least certainly your first few customers. The other bad thing about it is you max out your credit cards, which is maybe nowadays you don't have to do that so much because there's so much venture capital available in Canada these days. But the other thing you do have to do is manage your cash, and I'm trying to see if that's in there. Yeah. So since we're talking about funding, we started with $400,000 in '96. Through angels and friends, we probably raised about another $600,000 in '97. And then we probably at one point we were out of money. And we went to our employees and we asked them for more money. And we raised some money. We gave some of them loans. I think we gave some of them stock options. And then we found a company, actually a Toronto company, were friends of mine, who had agreed to put some money in us, I think about $500,000. And it was going to save our bacon because we were out of money again. And I got a call one day from my friend at ISS, and he said, Ray, I got bad news. We can't, we agreed to give you $500,000. We can't. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, I can't tell you why we can't give you the money. I'm going, Jesus, we need this money, Gar. I mean, damn it. I thought we explained that. And he's going, I'm sorry, I can't. I really feel bad, just can't do it. So I called Hal up, and Hal was in New York trying to raise money from a New York venture capitalist. And Hal was a little depressed also, and he's going, well, we can't take no from these guys. So so Hal said, listen, I'm landing in he's landing in Detroit at 11. He's going to get in his car, drive to Waterloo, where we are. That's going to take 4 hours. It's going to be 3 in the morning. We're going to get prepared, and we're going to go to Toronto. We're going to talk to these guys. So Hal showed up at my place at 3. We spent a couple hours sort of building a rational argument. We drove into Toronto at 6 in the morning. We were sitting on number 10 King Street East waiting for my friends to show up. And when they showed up, we kind of said, Dave and Gar, we really got to have that money. Right? And they took us in their boardroom and they tried to explain to us why they couldn't. It turned out somebody had offered to buy their company and they were basically locked down. And in theory, they just couldn't give us any money. But we did talk them out of $350,000 of it, which was enough to keep us going. And so we did get the money. Sometimes, as I said, it takes extraordinary effort to do that. We had to go stand on their doorstep at 6 in the morning with our cup of Tim Hortons coffee, waiting for them to show up. And the other thing, finally, we got Arbor Partners who put some more money into us. So that gets us into early 98. And as I said, cash management, the order in which we did things, we paid our employees first because they're your most valuable asset. We paid our suppliers next, and sometimes we rotated them because it's important to have good supplier relationships. And we paid our executives if there was any money left, which wasn't every month, I can tell you. There's an interesting story here around about probably early 98. We're still really out of money again, and my credit cards are all maxed out. Basically, I try to go into the bank on Saturday and put enough money on it so I can do the next week's travel and hotel rooms. But one particular day I didn't have enough money, and I get a call from Jim who says, Ray, I'm supposed to be at Chase Manhattan Bank with IBM on Monday, and a good friend of his had a health problem, and he had to go to California. So they can't do it. Can you go out and do the job with IBM? He said, just, we're going to take you into Chase. We know they're looking at something. And I said, sure. I called up the travel company, and they said, your credit cards are still all broken. And I said, great. I called Vinay and said, Vinay, this is Chase. We got to get there. I got no money, and what do I do? And he said, give me a couple of minutes. So he phoned me back and said, I've called the hotel, and they've agreed to take a photocopy of his American Express card, and front and back. And he said, so I'm going to fax it to you, and you take it when you get to the hotel. And we're going to buy the airplane ticket for you because my credit cards didn't work. So I flew into New York, got to the Marriott, walked up with the photocopy of the credit card and said, I want to check in. They looked at that and went, what the heck is this? I said, it's been pre-cleared. But the desk clerk said, no, I don't think so. I mean, how do I know this is a valid contract? So she said, I need a photocopy of the Vinay Gupta's driver's license. So I phoned Hal and Vinay, who it turned out, I believe, were driving from Detroit to Chicago to try and get some money from venture capitalists. I believe a truck had forced them off the road. They were stuck in the snowbank, and they were in their business suits trying to shovel it out with the hubcaps or something like that. And I told them, hey guys, I need a photocopy of Vinay's driver's license. And so they said, well, it's a little difficult right now, but we'll see what we can do. So they phoned me back, and they'd found a truck stop which had a photocopier but no fax machines. Then they'd drive to another truck stop, and they found a fax machine. So at 2 in the morning, I'm sitting in the lobby, and they call me over and say, it's okay, we got the credit card, or we got the driver's license faxed, and so you can have a room. And so, interesting, funny now, not so funny at the time, but you do stuff like that. Now, by the way, that was the day that I supposedly made a sale without pants. It was another story. I had, that's not as bad, not what you're thinking, but in my haste to get ready for that trip, I'd gone into my closet. This is another advice, always have a suitcase packed and ready. I had a complete spare set of shaving stuff and all the sort of personal hygiene stuff you need, and throw in some socks and underwear, and all you gotta do is grab a shirt and suit and head for the airport. So I grabbed my suit out of the closet, and I head to the airport, and what I didn't realize is that the suit has suspenders on the slacks, and they got caught on the bottom shelf, and as I'm pulling it out, the slacks stayed behind. So I get up in the morning, because this was Sunday, I'd traveled in my most comfortable pair of jeans, which probably would be fashionable today because they had holes and stuff in them. But I showed up, and I'm sitting there going, in the morning I get up at 6 o'clock, and I go, where the hell are my slacks? And I replayed it in my mind. I thought, oh, I think I know where they are. So I called down to the bell captain and said, what color are the slacks of your bellman? Because maybe I could get something that would perhaps match my kind of bluish green, a little flashy looking suit. And it wasn't even close. So I said, are there any men's stores that are open at this time of the morning that take photocopies of credit cards? And they said no. So I I put on my ratty-looking jeans, and I headed to the meeting, and I met the IBM team in a Starbucks, and I could see in their eyes as they saw me walking in. They're thinking, oh, shit. I hope that's not him. And there I was. So I told them I heard it was semi-formal, and so I showed up semi-formal. But in '98, in May, we had raised, I realize the math might be wrong here, but somehow we'd raised close to $2 million. We'd actually been approached by another company who wanted to buy us because they wanted to enter this space, and they were going to just acquire us. And the thing that was disturbing about it was they'd put a deal forward which would have really disadvantaged our shareholders and our employees. And the whole part of the deal that they thought would make it work was to offer very large management contracts to Hal and I because we had the most shares and we could have just done the deal on our own. But Hal and I looked at each other in the eye, and we went outside and said, and I was so damn broke that that the offer of a $3 million management contract was something I couldn't even imagine having that much money. And yet I said to Hal, I would not feel right if we took money ourselves and screwed the people who lent us money and screwed the people who really worked their hearts out for us, right? So we turned it down. We were looking at a VC term sheet from 3 venture capitalists, and we thought we were in heaven because we had Menlo, Morgan Thaler, and Prism, I think. So we sat down and said, hey, we're going to play them off against each other. Well, the bad news is venture capitalists actually talk to each other all the time. And so we had our strategy ready, and they called us up and said, guess what? Menlo and Morgan Thaler are going to partner on this, and Prism's not interested. So we found ourselves now back to the standard VC discussion, which is, what's your valuation? But we took the deal. Not as good a deal as the one we turned down a year earlier, but at this time, it was the only deal in front of us, and it was actually pretty fair. And we liked the guys at Menlo and Morgan Thaler. We thought they got it, and they told us things like, you need more than you asked for, and we were a little skeptical, and they said, trust us, we've done this a lot, take more. We did. They said, and by the way, we have more if you need it, just get out there and win. And so we did. We went out and started hiring more people, we bought stuff, moved forward. We then, I don't know what, this is probably out of joint, but anyhow, we'll go to partners briefly. We, by this time, had quite a few partners. IBM, the Lasercom guys in Europe, Xerox, both North America and Europe, EDS, which is a large service bureau in the US, M&I Data Services, another big one in the US. And we'd also built some of these service bureaus that did the ASP or SAS thing for us. Moore, Standard Register, and Vestcom were a bunch of them. So we were really doing pretty well by then. Our partners were all doing reasonably well. Our service bureau partners were doing well. And takes us into '99. Sometime, again, in the middle of '99, we raised about another $20 million, which I believe gave us a valuation about 60. And we were the market leader. Nokia Labs, Gartner, Giga, Forrester all had us as the leaders. I think we're probably 4 or 5 times bigger than the number 2 player, so we really were. Now, we're all pretty little, but we were that much bigger. There were some tough guys. I mean, the eDocs guys, much as we hated them, they had Charles Rivers as a VC backer, which is pretty formidable. We lost several deals because Charles River could reach into executive boardrooms that we didn't, so we lost the deal at Amex, and we lost the deal at GE, just because these guys' VCs were that good. We got those back later, but yeah. So it was tough times, but we were doing well. We're working hard. We were spending the money. We opened an office in London, and we were just starting to open one in Singapore. We had 50 customers, so that's about 3 years of work, and we have 50 customers. We're doing okay. We have about 100 people in the company, and we were having some other problems. We had some issues with growth. Now, at the time, I was the CTO, I was the VP of development, I was the VP of services, I was the sales assistant, and sitting on the management team. Hal was CEO and marketing, and Vinay was operations and finance, and we were all in sales. So what we found is as we were growing, we'd kind of outgrown our team and we'd outgrown our people, and my development group was complaining about the only time they ever saw me is I showed up to change their priorities and give them something new to do in some ridiculously short period of time. So they called it getting raid. So we went out and hired a really good marketing guy, a VP for services, a VP for development, and probably one of the most important things is we hired a product management VP who taught me what product management was. And we were looking at doing an IPO, and our VCs had actually suggested to us that while they were happy and we'd done a great job, we were going to IPO in 2000. They said, you guys, you've done everything right, we have no complaints, but we have to tell you that if you had they called it an experienced CEO who'd done an IPO before, you could probably double your IPO. So Hal just said, okay, when do we start looking? Because doubling your IPO was a pretty big idea. We were working forward with that. We also, our VCs had put us together with the VCs of the number 3 player in the business. And we decided that we would merge the two companies. They were in San Francisco, we were in Waterloo and Ann Arbor. We would merge it together, but merging number 1 and number 3 would give us a lot more clout, would make us genuinely the biggest player out there. And then we were going to IPO in mid to late 2000. We were, I believe, 1 day away from closing that deal, which would have acquired the number, we'd spent like 4 months planning the acquisition and the merger. And 1 day away, and I got a call from Hal saying, tell the VP of development from San Francisco to call his boss. I was saying, why? He said, I'll tell you afterwards. And so Brad called his boss, told him to come home. He said, what's going on? I said, I don't know. Hal called me back and said, CheckFree's offered to buy us. And so we took a week, sat down. We had an emergency board meeting. We're thinking, well, the IPO is $200 to $400 million probably. What do we ask? CheckFree said, how much do you want? And so we said, 250 million US. And they said, okay. And we said, oh, shit. We should have asked for more, because if they didn't negotiate, that was... but then it took till April to close the deal because of the SEC and the fact that the same, within a month, CheckFree bought a big chunk of a Microsoft subsidiary, which caused the SEC to go crazy on all of us. But we closed the deal. I had to stay with the tech team and stay at CheckFree. So a couple more slides, and I forgot to look at the timing. We're almost on time. Try and share with you what actually worked here. So, what worked was we had great teamwork and we had trust between the employees of the team. And it's very, very important, because when you start this kind of venture, it's crazy, it's exciting, it's depressing. There are times when the stress is incredible. And the last thing you want to do is to be fighting with each other or not trusting each other. And so you've got to, when you get into doing something like this, and be careful. Just because you're friends with somebody doesn't mean you're going to like them in 2 years when you've been working together. So you better learn how to communicate and how to express yourself clearly and make sure that you're always being open and clear with each other. Right? The other thing I think that was really important was strong marketing. Marketing is what sets you out there. I know on one occasion we had Bank of America come up to Waterloo to visit us. We were in the basement of a dentist's office. We had about 15 people. Actually, we had 8 people working in that office. Bank of America brought 8 people to visit us. They were going to do an evaluation. They walked in, they looked around, they went, we thought you had a couple hundred people. Like, where is everybody? I said, we're virtual. We got people here, and we got people, we had 2 people that working in other locations. But it was interesting. They thought we were huge. And you do need a strong technology team. And, again, hire the best you can. Our technology team at Bluegill did amazing stuff. There was 5 smart guys and me, and initially, and then we grew it not very much bigger than that, and did a ton of work. And we beat guys who had much larger development groups because we paid good attention to really good architecture and design. Also, I think we worked 2 or 3 times as long as other guys did. We also took advantage of the Waterloo area's sort of technology reputation. We managed to get our names in the paper a lot. We got on radio and TV a lot. And we didn't do that because I had any great interest in doing that. I wasn't that good at it. And in spite of all the communications and training I took, I still made mistakes when I was talking to the press and others. But the point is, we were able to establish ourselves in the Waterloo region as a very cool company. And we got that out through, that eventually got into the co-op program. It got into some of the other tech companies in town. And it made it very easy to hire as we went forward. So we were always able to hire really good people because we had a list of people who wanted to work for us. We worked really, really hard. But we also had fun. So we had a lot of team events. We were from day one split between Ann Arbor and Waterloo, and that's a tough challenge for a small company. What that meant is that Hal and I and the other executives spent a ton of time traveling back and forth. And my car used to know how to go from Waterloo to Ann Arbor on its own. And we did. We went back and forth, spent a lot of time, talked to people a lot, made sure people knew what was going on all the time, just communicated constantly. And then we had another attitude, which was go big or go home. We said, we are going to be the biggest. We're going to act like the biggest, and it worked for us. I already covered some of this. Communicate a lot, travel. Everybody in the team knew everybody. We did a lot of social events. We'd get people in a bus or truck and drive them from one location to the other and back and forth. We did company events halfway in between the 2 cities and take people in for a weekend, and that was after we had VC funding. And we worked hard, we played hard, we tried to include people's families in as much as we could. We were pretty aggressive about bumper car and paintball. And again, we got very good people through taking that attitude. So, I think I said this already. A company called GH Smart. I think they got a new book out that's quite popular. I think it's called Help. But they have a theory that says top people outperform average people by several orders of magnitude. Well, no. In certain areas in sales, 200 to 1. In software, 10 times more work out of a high-end guy than out of an average guy. So always try to hire the smartest guys you can. On a personal note, hire good lawyers and accountants, because if you don't, you can get in trouble. I won't bore you with it, but it cost me some money because we didn't do this properly initially. And the other thing is get the right partners. We decided IBM was the right partner. It turned out they were. IBM was doing a very big chunk of our business by the time we got sold. And the other thing you have to learn is, at least for me, what worked is something that I call compartmentalizing. When you're working really crazy and you got lots of things going on, you got to be able to kind of focus on one thing at a time, which is kind of the antithesis of multitasking, but you can't let the fact that the phone's ringing because the bank wants your mortgage payment when you're in the middle of trying to get some software developed or get a sale done. And so you got to just not let that stuff bug you. Now, the downside is, of course, one point, I was paying, 1 month pay the mortgage, the next month pay the telephone bill, the next month pay the car loan. And 1 month I screwed up and Scotiabank, don't publish that, showed up and towed my truck away in front of all my neighbors, which is really a treat. And to make it even worse, my son, who had lent me, his money, wasn't going to school anymore. He had a job in Guelph. His car died. He was using my truck. He ended up losing his job. So there is some downside to doing this, and that was depressing. But you just had to say, I'm over it. I got work to do. Get on with it, right? And so, never give up. That's my theory. So I think I'm there. Nobody asked a question, or if you did, I apologize for not seeing you out there, but I'm open to any questions you might have. If not, I'll stand around for a while afterwards if anybody wants to chat. Yes, sir. What does COREWORX do? We're probably one of the leading companies in supplying technology to manage project information and document content on really large capital projects. So in a nutshell, people building $20 billion floating oil platforms or $6 billion power plants use our software to manage the documents through all those complex business processes. That was a different question. Yes, sir.
I'm curious as to where you think product management is critical in the development of product management.
The question is, where do I think product management is in the development of a new venture? I don't know if you're a fan of product management or not, so I'm not sure how to answer that. But certainly when I started this, I didn't even know what product management was. And quite frankly, I think for the first couple of years, I kind of did product management as well as CTO. I didn't realize it at the time, and Hal did product marketing and marketing. Then I hired a guy named Bill Scott who taught me pragmatic marketing's idea of product management. Bill had a ton of experience working at NCR and other places. And I suddenly realized that product management was pretty important. We had been lucky and we'd kind of worked hard, but when Bill came on, I started to understand what the value is. Product management are the guys who should be telling your software guys what to do. They should be talking to your customers about what do they really need, or what do they mean when they say that. And so it is very important to have good product management. It's also very hard to find good product management. Yes, sir. How did we go about finding our VCs to fund our company? I guess I missed that part. Well, you prepare a presentation. You kind of give it your best shot at explaining the market. Hal mostly spent a year putting a business plan together. And that was, that's how long it took to get a really good, the thing was this thick. Actually, it was stolen by the eDocs guy who used it to fund his business too. But don't publish that part either. So yeah, it's the way everybody does it. I got our business plan. We put some PowerPoints, and we hit the road. We called. We tried to find VCs who cared. Our problem was we were talking about doing something nobody had done before. Well, the internet was kind of interesting in '96. It still wasn't kicking on 8 cylinders, and people were saying, well, corporate software, that's kind of boring, and so I can't count the number of VCs we visited before we finally got Menlo and Morgenthaler to sign up. But you make a list, you try to figure out which VCs focus on the areas you're interested in, and you try to get in to see them. Now, that can sometimes be difficult. We would try to find, as I said, the MBA network. Can we find somebody who knows somebody who can get us in to see Piper Jaffray, or no, that's a bank. I've luckily forgotten all this stuff because it was a ton of travel. We visited VCs. Hal and I drove all over the Midwest in a car to save money to visit VCs in Cleveland and other places, Chicago, Detroit. But it's just, you go out and you sell. I mean, you get your idea, you make your business plan, you improve it every time, you ask for feedback when you don't get funded to find out what they didn't like. And then, I remember at one point we were talking to Morgenthaler Ventures, and Gary Morgenthaler was looking at our technology, and we'd done the sort of the market and the size of the market and the marketing pitch, and then we did the technology pitch. And early on, Bluegill had tried to solve a technical problem, which is how do you represent a highly variable piece of data like a bill in an application that you want to have fairly consistent. And we stumbled across using something called SGML, which is really I guess, grandfather of the internet and everything else. SGML is where XML came out of and other things. And we'd created something called BGML, Bluegill Markup Language. And it was a language to define the data structures of complex bills. And we were very proud of that, BGML. Right? What we didn't realize for a while was that our competitors were going around saying, those guys are using that weird BGML stuff. It's proprietary. If you put your data into their system, you'll never get it out. Worse yet, they store it in binary. You know, binary in a computer, what a concept. So Gary Morgenthaler said to me, that BGML looks a lot like XML. I said, it's better. Because we looked at XML when it came out, and we were already done BGML, and it was better. And so I'm pretty proud of that. And he said, well, I don't think we'd ever fund anybody who had a proprietary markup language, but if it was XML, we'd talk to you. So back to Waterloo, called the guys together and said, we got 2 weeks to be XML. And we did. Now, what was amazingly close, the stuff we had done and what was the XML specification at the time. And you can call it, you know, genius or luck, I guess. But it was so close, it actually wasn't a real difficult job to turn it into XML. And once we did that, when we started hyping the XML, we could then ride the XML wave as we went forward. And so we did that. But again, you know, that was one VC made that one comment, and if I'd been a little more arrogant than I was, I probably would have ignored him. But I did listen. Yes, sir.
I'm interested in your $400,000. How did you get them? How did you get investors to put the money even before you were an idea?
So the gentleman asked, how did we convince people to put up $400,000 when it was just an idea? So that's kind of angel or, I don't know, founder money. Hal and I had been looking at it. We said, this looks interesting. We had this business plan. We had a PowerPoint presentation. You know, we went to Vinay, who was Hal's friend, and said, you know, do you think this is real enough that you'd put in 50 grand? By the way, Vinay kept his day job for the first year because we couldn't afford to pay a CFO. And then we went to Tom Kinnear, who was actually been one of the profs that had taught Hal and Vinay, and so they had a personal relationship. Tom said, yeah, I can put in 50 grand. And then Hal had a friend, John Moore, who actually is funding COREWORX right now. And John Moore looked at it and said, I can get 3 other guys to put up 50,000. So there's 8 guys, 50,000 bucks, you got 400,000. It's people you know. It's real hard to convince people you don't know to give you money. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Your $5.8 million round, how long did that last and how did you spend it?
Lasted about a year. We spent it rapidly. Well, we had been, you know, it was actually, there's a funny story around that. We were so used to being cheap, and Vinay was a fantastic CFO. He could make a dollar go so far you wouldn't believe it. And we finally got the money, and we were still acting cheap. And I think we had a board meeting, and the VC said, if you don't start spending the money, we're taking it back. So, and they said, you know, we gave you the money to grow the company, not to earn interest. And so we went out and doubled the size of the development team. We brought new servers, we bought new laptops, we hired more developers, we hired marketing people, we hired sales people, and you know, we put a plan that says, here's what we're going to do, and we did it. And that's how we spent the money. You know, we opened an office in the UK with that money. Spending it's easy, getting it's hard. Yes, sir.
Based on what you've already done with a company like Bluegill, the way the landscape has changed now, going into 2009, the economic news that we're hearing daily, what is some of the advice you'd give for people that are writing a business plan and need to obtain that first investment from an angel? Because you're an investor now as well, in financial capacity. Based on what you've learned, what would you counsel them to do with a business plan?
The question was, given this is 2009 and my experience, what would I advise to people since I've done this once? And I think you also mentioned that I've invested in other technology companies. So the first advice I'd give you is if I ask you to invest in something, don't, because every one of the little companies I've invested in has failed except for this one. But then, no, the serious answer to your question is, right now cash is king. You got to find a way to first off, try and get that money from friends and family to get going, get enough of a product built or something so you can demonstrate something to somebody. Make friends with guys like Randall, come to Mars, in Waterloo, come to Communitech. It's about networking and looking for help everywhere you can and conserving your cash. And so I'm sure that you can get great advice here on how to write a business plan, because some people don't know. And a good business plan is a good idea. It does help a lot. Some market research is pretty important. You might think something's a great idea, but if you can find some research that helps you prove that, so when you go to somebody and say, lend me some money because I think if we build this, I can sell that much, then that's good. And again, there's places to do that. The internet now is wonderful because you can do a lot of research like that. But I think, the ability to do really professional looking business plans and presentations does help. And again, it's still got to be a good idea. So that's about all I can say. It's tough raising money right now. We're raising money right now too, and it's tough even when you got customers and you're fairly big. The markets right now are pretty brutal. But I think there is VC money out there for good ideas. Certainly there's seed funds and other kinds of money, and there are people like Randall who can help you find some of that. That's about all I can tell you on I'm busy trying to raise my own money right now. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Could you join me in thanking Rick?